Alright, ladies and gents, you know what time it is. We've got Code Veronica on the brain. After news recently surfaced that a remake will be coming out next year, I know I, for one, am psyched. And it seems like now is a better time than ever to make a video about the original game. What is there to say about Resident Evil Code Veronica? In the year 2000, it was the first step that Resident Evil took into the next console generation, and it made its debut on the Sega Dreamcast. Of course, later, it was released on the PS2 as well as other platforms, but for this video, I'm going to specifically cover the Dreamcast version. As someone who collects retro games, I was stoked for this opportunity because I don't get to play Dreamcast games very often, and I'm always looking to add to my collection. Code V seemed like a perfect fit, and out of all the old school Resident Evil games, Code Veronica is definitely one of the more memorable titles, and the idea of a remake has been a popular discussion amongst the Resident Evil community for a while. Even before the actual remake was announced, fans have been demanding it for a long time. And usually, if someone wants to see a game remade, it means one of two things. One is because that person is a fan and they want to see that game reimagined so they could experience it in a new way. The other reason is because that person isn't a fan and they want to see it done better. Now, you may wonder what category I fall under. This is where things get kind of complicated. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this and trying to figure out how to go about this whole thing, because I'm going to be totally honest with you, this is an extremely hard game to review, and it's for one main reason. My feelings on it have not remained consistent. If you asked me what I thought of this game when I first played it, I would have given you a completely different answer than I would have given now, so I had to take some time with this one. To sum it up, when I first played Code Veronica, I was not a fan of it. Quite literally the opposite, in fact. I thought it was one of the most frustrating games I ever played in my life, and in almost every conceivable way across the board, I thought it was an embarrassment to the rest of the series. The production value seemed shamelessly low and cheap. Most of the elements that made the old games scary and effective are wiped out in this game. The storyline, as well as the characters it introduced, made me cringe, and I didn't feel like it was a story that belonged in the Resident Evil universe. Because of that, I tried to convince myself that it wasn't a real Resident Evil game. It felt more like fan fiction to me. But the funny thing is, I could have gotten past all of that, but the nail that sealed the coffin for me was how frustratingly hard and cryptic the gameplay was. I make no bones about it, I think that this is by far the hardest out of all the old Resident Evil games. I know that some people say that Zero was the hardest, but I've played and beaten both games, and I thought Zero was a walk in the park comparatively. And on top of that, Code Veronica has one of the single worst boss fights I think I've ever seen in a video game. Now, with all these different factors combined, by the time I was finished, I told myself I would never play this game again, and I was already planning to review it, and my plan was to go scorched earth on this motherfucker. I was gonna roast the shit out of it and insult it in every way humanly possible, but then something happened. I decided for the sake of this review, I was gonna play it a second time just so I can understand it better, and of course, guess what ends up happening? I ended up liking it. Because I had already beaten this game once, and I already knew what to expect with it, my second playthrough went so much smoother, and not only did it feel easier to me, but dare I say, I actually had fun with it. So now my plan was thrown off because I had to think of a different way to approach this review, because I didn't hate it as much as I did the first time. Okay, so then I ended up playing it a third time to record the gameplay footage for this video, and guess what? Now I like it even more than I did the second time. In fact, I like it so much now that I might even say that I'm a fan. Damn it! This is not something I'm happy about. I'm actually pissed over this because, like I said, I was planning to go full AVGN on this son of a bitch. I really wasn't expecting to change my thoughts on this. And by the way, that usually doesn't happen with me. Usually when I form a stance on something, it remains concrete and it doesn't change. I'm not saying it never happens, but it's very rare. And to give you an example, my stance on all the other Resident Evil games have not changed one iota since I first played them. This is the only one, and because of that, I have to say, on some weird level, I kinda respect it, as it's the only game to have that effect on me. If you don't want to be bothered watching the rest of this video, I'll give you my official stance right now. Resident Evil Code Veronica is an extremely fun game with a ton of replay value. However, when you play it for the first time, it is a hateable hateable fucking game. Now do with that information what you will, and as for the rest of you who have a half hour to kill, let's dive in, because whether you like this game or not, it deserves the respect of a proper review, and while we go over it, we need to keep in mind that this game is getting a remake very soon, and perhaps we could talk about the things that could be improved. We basically know that Resident Evil 2 ended on a cliffhanger with the Chris Redfield saga. The last we heard, he went rogue and tried to take on Umbrella on his own. Code Veronica is the first entry where we finally find out what happened to him. The first half of the game focuses solely on Claire trying to find him. After firing up the game, the first thing that stands out is this insanely over-the-top Michael Bay-esque cutscene. You could instantly tell that this is where the series started to forget its roots and deviate from the horror genre. In fact, if you showed this cutscene to someone who never even played this game, I don't think they'd be able to even guess that this was a Resident Evil game. It features Claire Redfield infiltrating a lab and then being chased by a massive team of armed forces. And since the events of Resident Evil 2, she apparently obtained these James Bond-like abilities. But then she ends up being captured and locked up in a prison cell on Rockford Island. This is where the game switches from the opening cinematic to the in-game graphics, and for one thing, Claire looks completely different than she did in the opening cinematic, like specifically her face looks different. In the opening, she has a face that looks kinda angry and mean, but here her face looks almost sweet and innocent. And even her overall vibe doesn't really match what we saw in the beginning. First, we see her as like this ultimate badass action star, but then throughout the rest of the game, there's at least several other parts I could name where she's made out to be a helpless damsel in distress who needs a man to save her. The whole thing just seems very inconsistent to me. Like, it makes me wonder what the backstory was behind that opening cinematic. Like, in theory, I wonder if they came up with it at the last minute of production just because they thought it would help boost sales. Anyways, the island ends up being attacked, and suddenly there's a T-virus outbreak and you have to escape. It begins in a similar way as Resident Evil 2, where you're completely surrounded by zombies and you have to think on your feet. But believe it or not, this game actually does go easy on you because for one thing, you could take a hell of a lot more damage than you could in the previous games. Like, I don't know what kind of PEDs Claire's been taking, but she could take a shitload of bites to the neck before it even puts her in a danger zone. And one thing I have to say, this is the first Resident Evil game where I actually like using the knife. In fact, I actually find that in most cases, the knife was more effective than the handgun. And I never actually realized this until my third playthrough. And the fact that Claire is able to take so much damage actually makes it a perfect opportunity to practice with the knife. I'll tell you this much, if I ever attempt to do my first knife-only run, it's going to be with this game. Now let's talk about the mechanics and the control scheme. I've already stated that Resident Evil 3 was an improvement over 2 in this category, but Code Veronica seems to lie somewhere in the middle. It seems like the mechanics in Code V resemble the second game more so than the third. Once again, this game makes you hold up while pressing the action button to walk up and down the stairs, whereas Resident Evil 3 evolved from that system. The fact that Code Veronica went backwards on the evolution scale like that is a little disappointing to me. And for the record, I know it's not a huge deal, but at the same time, having to perform a button combination to walk up the stairs just seems like such an archaic thing that frankly should have died after the first game. And the fact that they kept this stupid mechanic in a newer game on a completely new system after Resident Evil 3 already undid that shit just seems inexcusable to me. Another thing they did away with was being able to dodge enemy attacks. Again, it's another thing I liked in the third game, and in this game I'd argue that it makes even more sense to include it when you consider that this game seems to be more grounded in action than the other games. Not to mention there are a ton of enemies that the dodging would have come in handy against, such as the dogs and these guys who stretch their arm out. Of course, I can't complain too much because the single greatest feature that Resident Evil 3 introduced was the quick turn, and thankfully Code Veronica kept that. Frankly, I'd rather they keep that and get rid of all the other shit than have it the other way around, so it does score some points for me. But then this game has to annoy me by changing the way I fire my weapon. In all the other games, if you hold the trigger, the character would keep shooting, but here they make it semi-automatic to where you have to constantly pull the trigger in order to shoot. And this brings me to the next topic, which is the way that this game plays on a Dreamcast controller. I, for one, love it. Usually with tank controls, I tend to prefer using the D-pad on a PlayStation controller, but the L-stick on a Dreamcast controller feels surprisingly fluent and responsive, especially when doing the quick turn. Another awesome feature that's exclusive with the Dreamcast is that you could see your health status on the controller. It might be a little gimmicky, but it's still a neat feature that makes the Dreamcast version more distinctive. However, I do have a complaint. The button layout was changed from what those of us were already used to. Unlike the other games where the action button was on the bottom and the button to run was on the left, here, for whatever reason, the Dreamcast controller swaps them. Now the button on the left is the action button, and not only is the button on the bottom what makes you run, but it's also the button that makes you exit out of shit. It's really confusing when you're trying to adapt to this game for the first time, especially when you were used to the previous games where X made you select shit, and here the X button, which is actually the A button on a Dreamcast controller, makes you exit. Now it doesn't bother me as much because I've basically adapted to it, but it still doesn't explain why they had to do that. One major downgrade with this game that frankly still annoys me is that you can't quit the game or exit to the main menu. Once again, this is another area where this game goes backwards on the evolution scale. Both Resident Evil 2 and 3 gave you the option to exit to the main menu, but here they brought it back to Resident Evil 1 standards to where if you wanted to exit to the main menu for whatever reason, like let's say you made a mistake and loaded the wrong save, you would either have to purposefully get yourself killed or reset the Dreamcast entirely, which to me is so insanely stupid, especially when the feature was already in the previous games. But then Code Veronica also happened to introduce one of the best features ever. Remember in my other videos where I complained about the fact that some of these games made you wait too long after you die just to restart? In the first game, you had to wait and skip through all the opening previews just to get to the main menu, and then you had to select Load Game and hit your previous save. The second game improved this by not showing you the opening previews and instead took you straight to the main menu, so no time was wasted, and on top of that, it highlighted your previous save so you wouldn't have to look for it. Then Resident Evil 3 had to go fuck everything up by making you sit through a preview again, and for whatever reason it took you longer to skip it, and unlike the second game, your previous save wasn't highlighted. But now, look at what happens in Code Veronica. Unfriggin' believable. No time is wasted whatsoever. It immediately puts you back to your previous save. And on top of that, there are parts in the game that give you actual checkpoints. Okay, now this game is speaking my language. One of the things that frustrates me with this game is the fact that things are up and down with it. There are some ways it surpasses the old games, and then there are ways it completely fucking plummets. And that brings us to the story. Along the way, Claire meets Steve, which is a part that can only be described as a soul-crushing experience for some poor, naive soul that was expecting to take this game seriously. If you want to know who Steve is, then the best way I could sum it up is he's basically the Jar Jar Binks of the Resident Evil universe. And if that analogy doesn't work for you, then I can only describe him as a person that resembles the small pellet of shit that clings to your asshole when you think you've finished going number 2, but then it continues to hang on like the barnacle stuck to the hull. And this is where you come to the unfortunate realization that this abominable chode is going to be the game's side character. I mean, first of all, you take one look at him and you want to laugh. I don't even know how to describe it, but it's like if they made a gay porn version of Star Wars, he'd be the Han Solo. And I love the fact that they figured by giving him the same haircut as Leon that people would automatically fall in love with him, like it was some kind of ingenious marketing strategy that the developers were high-fiving each other over. Actually, if anything, he almost looks like that marionette from the movie Team America. And as for his personality, they somehow made it more annoying than his appearance. He's like AJ from The Sopranos. In every single interaction, he continuously acts like a spoiled, whiny, petulant little bitch.
He won't come. Believe me, I know. I found it and I'm keeping it. Come on, let's go. What, are you scared?
It was dirty work, but this area is now clean. Shut up! I don't want to talk about it!
And on top of everything, just to twist a knife, you come to realize that there's going to be a love interest between him and Claire. This is where I tried to convince myself that this was not a real Resident Evil game. Not only is the tone and atmosphere from the previous games completely gone here, but the story and the character interactions make it come off like it was thought up by some obnoxious, horny teenager. Or perhaps it was marketed to horny teenagers. Did they really think that every single guy who played this game resembled their vision for Steve? Frankly, I'm insulted. So later, you end up exploring this palace where you find your first save room. All I could tell you is get used to this place. This game requires the most amount of backtracking by far, so you're going to be spending a lot of time coming back here to save your progress. Eventually, you try to leave, but then suddenly you're stopped as you hear a woman scream.
Yeah! Help me!
Steve?
So you have to stop what you're doing to go back and investigate. Once you're in the room, you have to go and check the monitor. And, oh wait, Steve is suffering? Okay, good. I mean, I can't even imagine. I mean, look at this guy. I can't even fathom what they were thinking when they created this character. Like, look at this image. He looks like a 6-year-old kid that got lost inside a Toys R Us and he's trying to find his mom. Like, even the way he's holding those 2 guns banging on the door at them makes him look like a child throwing a temper tantrum. Like, I'm completely fucking speechless when I look at this. I basically have to resist every ounce of temptation within me to turn off my Dreamcast and play Resident Evil 0 instead, so I could at least remind myself of how a character like this is supposed to be handled. As far as I'm concerned, both Billy and this fucking jizz stain don't even belong in the same universe. And also, I love the fact that the thought doesn't even occur to him to just put the pistols back where he found them as a way to get out of this predicament. Like, the game is actually telling you that he's a fucking idiot because Claire was able to figure this out with no problem. So then you continue to explore the base. Like I said, lots of backtracking and lots of puzzle solving. Say what you will about the story, but the gameplay itself is as authentically Resident Evil as it gets. It seems very closely linked to the second game. They bring back some of the same weapons and upgrades, such as the bow and arrow. In this game, you're able to upgrade these arrows to be explosive, which is nice. I try my best to save all the explosive firepower as I can because it makes the bosses and other hard parts much easier. So I try to use my knife whenever I can. Another thing I recommend is to try and save as many health supplies as possible. Now granted, it might not be easy when you're just using your knife, but through trial and error, you will get better at it. I try to restrict myself to just using green herbs when my health reaches the danger point. If I could help it, I try to avoid using mixed herbs and first aid sprays. So throughout this gameplay, don't be surprised if you see me constantly holding on to my side. But one thing I found out the hard way is that there are boss fights later that are extremely hard to deal with if you don't have enough health supplies. Then you encounter Alfred Ashford, who, at least at this point, is the main villain.
Redfield! How dare you interfere with my operation?
What are you talking about?
You let yourself be captured so you could lead your people to this base!
I have no idea what you're babbling about.
You don't fool me! I am Alfred Ashford, commander of this base.
I don't think I need to say anything. What you just heard basically speaks for itself better than any commentary I have to offer. We already knew that the first Resident Evil was notorious for its bad voice acting, but as the series progressed, they kind of moved away from that. However, in this game, it's almost like they decided, hey, you know what, let's make it even worse, as if it were possible.
Welcome, Claire. Consider the area you are in a special playground I have prepared just for you. Please try and keep me amused, and do not disappoint me by dying too soon. I so want to enjoy this.
The amount of overacting that Alfred especially does is at a point where I feel like it's worthy of some kind of record or exclusive historical documentation, like Guinness Book of Records or something. Like, honestly, I've never heard another human being laugh or talk like that in my entire life. So anyways, as you continue to explore, this asshole continues to stalk you with his rifle. You find out that both he and his sister, Alexia, are part of this royal family, and their lineage links them to the founder of Umbrella. Throughout the game, you find countless documents explaining their history. As of this point, we only encounter Alfred, and there's no trace of Alexia. Now this is where things start to get, well, I was gonna say this game's already weird, but this is where things get weirder. You start to find Alfred's private journals and love letters to his sister. Then you watch like this old Super 8 footage of them as children and the way they interacted with each other. And right off the bat, you could definitely detect some incestuous undertones that aren't even subtle. And while I do think that the rest of this game fails in the horror category and it doesn't possess an ounce of the creepiness that the other games had, I will, however, say that this one scene probably gets my vote as the most uncomfortable scene in the entire series. The way that the two of them are behaving with each other, as well as the fact that they're behaving this way as children, and the fact that they're behaving this way while torturing an insect, really makes this scene disturbing. And speaking of disturbing things, later on you come to discover the unfortunate news that Steve is still alive. And to make things even worse, the game makes you play as him for a brief part. I just find it hilarious because while Claire is actually trying to use her head and problem solve to get out of this place, he's just running around like a jackass, shooting at everything in sight and wasting ammo. Later on, Steve reluctantly kills a zombie who turns out to be his father. Then we get a little backstory on how he ended up in this place. The father was an Umbrella employee who tried collecting information to sell, but once Umbrella caught wind of it, they imprisoned him. They also imprisoned Steve because, well, why wouldn't they? I mean, could you blame him? When I first saw Steve and heard his voice, my initial feeling was that he should be locked up also. And to take it a step further, they killed Steve's mom. And it might seem like a heartless and unnecessary thing for them to do, but there's a very logical explanation behind it. The reason they killed her is because Steve is so fucking annoying that they didn't want his mother to reproduce. The thought of there being another Steve was so horrifying to them that they had to come up with a contingency plan. I mean, think about it. They were actually more afraid of there being another Steve than they were of a T-virus outbreak. If that isn't a testament to Steve's level of annoyance, then I don't know what is. So later on, you end up exploring this castle. Look at this image. It doesn't even feel like I'm playing a Resident Evil game. It feels more like Castlevania. You end up finding both Alfred and Alexia's bedroom, which mirror each other. They both have a separate music box, and you have to transfer the plate from one to the other in order to open a passageway to an upper floor. And there's also another secret passage that's like a rotating door that takes you from Alfred's room to Alexia's. I mean, you know what this means, right? The fact that they both had that door meant that the two of them could go into each other's bedroom at any time to do whatever they wanted. So yeah, of course, in order to do something as simple as transferring the music plate from one box to the other, it requires an almost comical amount of backtracking. But once you accomplish it, you finally encounter Alexia, who, much like her brother, tries to kill you with a rifle. But then Steve finally makes himself useful and intervenes. After that, we're met with the game's bizarre plot twist that it was actually Alfred pretending to be Alexia. As if he wasn't batshit crazy enough, he also has a split personality. Then when he sees himself in the mirror, he screams in horror and then runs away like a bitch. I'm just speechless because I can't believe they managed to introduce a character that makes Steve look masculine in contrast. Like, that blows me away. At this point, the bar couldn't possibly be set any lower for the male characters in this game.
Alfred! Cross-dressing freak!
I'll take things that'll never be said in the remake for 900, Alex. I can't believe she actually said that. Bro, if that doesn't prove that this game came out in a different time, I mean, we just heard Claire, the main character, the person you're supposed to be rooting for, call someone a cross-dressing freak. That would never happen nowadays. What's interesting also is that I'm pretty sure that line wasn't in the original script. Supposedly in the Japanese version, she said something else. So someone thought that up in the American version. But I have to say, the line itself doesn't really make any sense because I don't think Alfred's a crossdresser. He just has a split personality which manifested from his obsession with his sister. But regardless if it doesn't make any sense, it's still a funny line. But unfortunately, I don't think Capcom will have the balls to put this in the remake. But hypothetically, if they don't puss out and they actually have Claire say that in the remake, I will be speechless. So, after Alfred escapes, he sets off the self-destruct sequence. Along with Steve, you have to escape the entire base. And this is where you experience one of the worst boss fights in history. Alfred releases a tyrant who you end up fighting inside the plane. This to me is beyond any doubt the worst part in the entire game, and it served as the #1 cause of my initial dislike for it. And frankly, even though I like this game now, just thinking about this part pisses me off. This fight is so poorly designed that frankly the people responsible for it should be ashamed of themselves. To begin with, you're in this small confined space and this asshole keeps following you. Every time he lunges at you, I find that it's impossible to avoid getting hit. If he lunges, you're getting hit. And God forbid this game allowed you to dodge like Resident Evil 3 because that would sure come in handy right now. And it's not like you have enough space to distance yourself from him, and if you stand too close to the back, he could actually knock you off the plane. The only clue you're left with on what you're supposed to do is the fact that you have to eject this piece of cargo that slams into him. But every time you do it, the thing has to reset, and the amount of time it takes to reset gives him enough time to beat the shit out of you. And like I said, his accuracy is impeccable. With every single attempt, I was only able to eject the thing 2 times. He would never allow me to make it to a 3rd time. I'd always be dead. I mean, perhaps I could have made it to a 3rd time if I had known in advance I was supposed to hold on to all my green herbs and first aid sprays without using them. But unfortunately, one of the biggest problems this game has is that it's designed in such a way that the players could very easily screw themselves. It gives little to basically no warning or guidance on how to prepare for certain parts, which, as far as I'm concerned, constitutes a flaw. This is one of those parts that got so frustrating for me to where I just said, you gotta be fucking kidding me, and I decided to look it up online because I kept dying at the exact same part, and it became clear that I was missing something. So it turns out the best way to kill him is to damage him before ejecting the cargo, and the best way to damage him is to use these green BOW gas rounds for the grenade launcher, which the game only provides you with 3 rounds for. Then after that, before the cargo thing resets, you should hit him with some additional explosives. Then finally, you could eject the cargo again and it'll knock him off with no problem. What pisses me off now is that once you know how to do it, it becomes too easy. Like now it suffers the opposite problem. It goes from one extreme to the other, and it doesn't really take any skill. This fight was hard, not because it required any skill or analytical thinking. It was only hard because of how ridiculously cryptic it is. And I'm sure some people want to call me an idiot and say, oh, it's your own fault, you should have figured out you were supposed to damage him beforehand. But let's analyze that for a second. Before this game came out, there was no other Tyrant boss fight where this happened. When you fought the Tyrant at the end of Resident Evil 1 and 2, the way they died had nothing to do with the amount of damage you did with your regular weapon, and the fact that this game deliberately indicates that you're supposed to eject that cargo would lead anyone to believe that that's all you have to do. And with every time you eject it, he gets pushed further and further back, so it's natural for anyone to assume that you don't need to use a weapon. And not to mention, unless the game blatantly tells you to, why would you want to use up ammo when you don't think you're supposed to? The whole point of survival horror is to conserve and not waste what you have. Also, here's another thought altogether. What if you already used up all of your explosive rounds? Like, let's say hypothetically you play this game for the first time, and for the sake of argument, let's say you didn't know what those BOW rounds were supposed to be used for, so let's say you decide to use them right away. Let's say you used up all of the remaining explosive arrows on the zombies and have none left. Let's say you used up all of your grenade launcher ammo trying to kill the gulp worm, or perhaps you used up everything during your first fight against the Tyrant. Now you're on the plane and you have nothing left. And to push the hypothetical even further, let's say you've got no herbs or first aid sprays. How the fuck are you supposed to do this part? A boss fight should not be designed this poorly. And I'm sure that some know-it-all who probably didn't figure anything out on their own is just waiting to correct me and say,
oh, well, technically you could avoid getting hit by him by just running alongside the walls and timing it in a way where he doesn't hit you.
But let's be honest, who wants to figure that shit out? Alright, regardless of what you say, this fight is universally hated for a reason. And okay, I'll push another hypothetical your way. What if your health is in the danger zone and you're limping? And because of this, you're not able to move fast enough to run alongside those walls and time it properly. What are you supposed to do then? And you might say, oh, well, you should load a previous save. Okay, well, what if you don't have a previous save? What if up until this point, you've only been saving your progress under one slot? What are you supposed to do then? A part like this should not be designed in such a way to where if you make a mistake or don't take the proper precautions, you're completely fucked beyond repair, especially when you made it this far in the game. And again, it goes from one extreme to the other. Once you know how to prepare for it, it's too easy. And even though the rest of this game grew on me, sincerely and from the bottom of my heart, fuck this stupid fight. So once I reached this part, I thought for sure that the game was over. It basically followed the same sequence as the previous games, and it ended with the place self-destructing and you had to fight a Tyrant. I didn't think there'd be anything else to it, until about 5 seconds later, this happened. Suddenly, I'm reminded of the fact that this game has 2 discs, and we only completed one half. By this point, this already felt like the longest game I've ever played, and that fight against the plane Tyrant basically crushed my soul. But it wasn't like I could give up. I already made it this far, so I had to suck it up and keep pushing forward. So both Claire and Steve end up exploring this Antarctic base.
Steve, watch out!
No! It's toxic gas!
What a dick. Like, honestly, I can't believe it. He's such a dick. Like, after a while, it's like watching a sitcom. So then you end up with one final encounter with Alfred that ends with him being fatally wounded. You then get a big cutscene where Claire and Steve try to escape, and Alfred is left bleeding to death. But now prepare yourself because we're about to get hit with plot twist number 2. We find out that the real Alexia is still alive, and she's been cryogenically sleeping for 15 years. The reason being that she injected herself with the T. Veronica virus, and I believe that in order for her to make the experiment work, she had to go through the 15-year cryogenic slumber. And I just have to say, as absurd and batshit crazy as the storyline is, this cutscene is absolutely incredible, just for its cinematic value alone. The way she wakes up to find her dying brother, and when she emerges with that hauntingly beautiful background score, and just the overall direction where he dies and she's stroking his hair while looking ahead with that cold, emotionless gaze. Say what you want about the story or the subject matter, but this scene is a work of art, and I repeat, pray that they keep this in the remake. And now that Alexia is awake, shit is about to get real. Through her abilities with the T. Veronica virus, she seems to have unlimited power, and almost effortlessly she attacks and incapacitates both Steve and Claire. And they're about to find out that they just pissed off the wrong sibling. However, Alexia is about to learn that same lesson because now, Chris is coming. The game immediately switches you over to Chris, who's back at Rockford Island. When we first see him, he's rock climbing his way up. And if you look closely, you'll realize that this is the first part in the entire game where you actually see something manly. Unlike before, where the only male characters we saw were wimpy douchebags like Alfred and Steve, now it's like Dad's home. Frankly, I'm nervous for whoever plays this game for the first time because this might be too much masculinity for them to handle. Like, honestly, this part should come with a warning or safety precaution. To have the player go through a game with characters who aren't even remotely masculine to then just suddenly hitting them with masculinity overload leaves a dangerous risk. Every time I see this part, I grow a thick layer of hair both on my chest and on my balls. And I guarantee that if you show this part to a 3-year-old kid, they'll hit puberty. I mean, the fact that the first thing we see Chris doing is rock climbing with that badass soundtrack is just too intense. Frankly, I'm offended by this because it's 2026 now, and the kind of behavior that Chris is showing here can only be construed as toxic masculinity. And there's just no room for that type of behavior in today's society, so I'm gonna have to report him and have him canceled. So then Chris makes his way inside of a cave where he finds the prison guard who freed Claire in the beginning. This guy would probably be the second manliest character in the game, and watching him interact with Chris is again like masculinity overload that the people who play this game aren't emotionally or intellectually prepared for. Like, every time I see this part, I get a surge of testosterone, like I want to fly a plane out to Australia so I could pick a fight with a kangaroo. It kind of reminds me of that scene in Predator where Arnold Schwarzenegger and Carl Weathers shake hands.
Dylan! You son of a bitch!
But unfortunately, this interaction doesn't last long because the gulpworm shows up out of nowhere and eats the guard. So now we play the rest of the game as Chris, and we start off by exploring the remaining parts of the military training facility. It mostly involves Chris investigating the situation and trying to find the whereabouts of his sister. It's like now their roles have been reversed. And now prepare yourselves for plot twist number 3. Wesker returns, back from the dead, and now he has superpowers. This is the first time he appears in the entire game, and I find it kind of amusing how there's no build-up or dramatic reveal. He just abruptly shows up out of nowhere. Once he discovers that Chris is on the island, he sends the hunters after him. So later on, you end up going to the same Antarctic base, and eventually you find Claire held up in a place that bears an eerie resemblance to the Spencer Mansion from the first game. In general, I notice that this game pays homage to the first game in more ways than one. When you come to this part in the hallway where the tentacles break through the window, the setting is almost identical to where the dogs attack you in the first game. When the hunters make their first appearance, the game shows you their POV as they stalk you, just like the first game. And there are countless puzzles here that resemble the puzzles from the first game, such as the tiger statue and the paintings with the buttons you have to press in the right order. Hell, for all I know, maybe the shitty voice acting was also done as a tribute. So anyway, you find Claire wrapped up in a cocoon.
Claire.
I think I've been poisoned.
So now you have to find a serum to cure Claire. Once she's cured, the game briefly makes you play as her for one final time. But in my opinion, this part, albeit short, was hands down the most excruciating part aside from the plane tyrant. The first obstacle you have to deal with is this Indiana Jones style death trap, where you have to place this solid ball containing a key card within the death trap in order to break it and expose the card. In order to do this, you have to move your ass and place that ball down, and you have to place it dead center and move out of there as fast as possible, or else your ass is getting crushed. How I managed to get through this part without punching a hole through my TV is honestly a miracle. Fuck. What am I supposed to do? Alright. Time for a break. Fuck! I really hate this part, man. You gotta be shitting me, dude. I'm starting to hate this game. I'm starting to really fucking hate this game, dude. God damn it, my fucking hands are sweating so much over this. This is fucking stressing me out. You better let me fucking place it this time. Oh, thank God. Holy shit, that felt like it took forever, dude. How many times did I die? Like fucking 4 times, I think? I forgot I still had to pick it up. Damn it! Then the next part is a final showdown with Steve. We find out that Alexia infected him with a virus that turns him into a monster. Once he transforms, he comes after you. Now my stupid ass initially thought that this was supposed to be a boss fight, but it turns out that you're only supposed to run away. You don't have to run too far, but here's the catch. All it takes is 2 swings from his double-headed axe to connect, and you're dead. And his accuracy is just about as impeccable as the plane tyrant. The only way I'm aware of to get through this part is to have at least 2 mixed herbs on hand or first aid sprays. That's it. Just keep running while replenishing your health. 2 should be enough. However, if that 1 mixed herb is all you have and nothing else, then I don't know what to tell you. I'm sorry. But hear this, if you die on this part, or the part with the death trap, the game sends you back to the starting checkpoint. There's no typewriters around, which means that Claire isn't allowed to save anymore. When this checkpoint starts, you have to replenish your health and then do a bunch of inventory management and collect shit. Then after that, you have to deal with this annoying part with the tentacles, then the part with the death trap, and then the part with Steve, all in one go. And the only reason this bothers me is because if you die, you have to deal with all the inventory management and collecting items at the start of the checkpoint again, which starts to get irritating after a while because why couldn't they have a typewriter, like right here for example? This way when I'm done with the inventory management, I could save so I won't have to deal with it all again. So after the encounter with Steve, he ends up regaining consciousness and then he saves Claire's life. But unfortunately, he couldn't save his own.
I'm glad that I met you. I love you.
But I have to tell you, it takes a real man to admit things he's uncomfortable with. And I have to admit, I did cry at this part. That's right. In case you thought I was heartless or that I possessed no emotion, just know I cried over Steve's death. It may have been from laughter, but nevertheless, I still cried. So from this point onward, it's full-on Chris, and he basically goes to war with Alexia. He takes her on in not 1, but 2 final forms, both of which are pretty fun boss fights if I do say so. Then we get 1 final cutscene and the story's finished. After that, you could switch back to the first disc and play the battle game, which is pretty fun. It more or less feels like a variation of the Mercenaries game from Resident Evil 3. You get to play as different characters, and you also have the option to play with a first-person view, which is kinda interesting. But there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That's Code Veronica. At the end of the day, it's a game I've had so many mixed feelings about, but as time went on, it definitely grew on me. To put it on a scale where I give it a numbered ranking is a very hard task because even though I like this game now, I still haven't really changed my stance that it's only enjoyable once you've already beaten it and you're familiar with every part. But if it's your first blind playthrough, on the other hand, it is a miserable experience. And frankly, it's not an experience I'd ever want to relive if I'm being totally honest. Like the first Resident Evil was a game I wish I could experience again for the first time because I loved it so much. But with Code Veronica, on the other hand, I'd rather shoot myself. This was the only Resident Evil game that made me give up and look up walkthroughs on YouTube. And that's why I say this is harder than Resident Evil 0, because 0 was a game I didn't need any tutorials or help with. I was able to beat it on my own with no problem. Code Veronica, on the other hand, was a game I found so cryptic, not so much because of the puzzles or the map exploration, but because of stupid parts like where you have to fight the plane tyrant. Things like that made the game feel inconsistent and broken. Because the game frustrated me so much during my first playthrough, it was very hard for me to recognize any positive attributes it had, which is why I think it's important to play it more than once. Looking back at it, I actually liked the story more than I initially did. I think Alexia is a really cool villain, and I think her screen time was cut too short. I would love to see what they do with her in the remake. And even the dynamic with her and her brother, while it is creepy, I do find it oddly compelling. I also like how the game pairs them both against the Redfield siblings. The first half depicts Claire versus Alfred, and the second half depicts Chris versus Alexia. I find it to be an overall badass story arc. Gameplay-wise, like I said before, it's as authentically Resident Evil as it gets. The combat, the puzzle solving, and the exploration is all there. It's a massive game that takes a great deal of time to beat. So you will be getting your money's worth, and much like Resident Evil 3, this game has a great deal of replay value, where you can change your tactic with each playthrough, and every time I play it, I end up liking it more than the last time. However, I'm not going to completely flip-flop my original opinion because quite frankly, there are still things about this game that do kinda suck, and some of my original complaints haven't changed. The first one being with the game's production value. First of all, they recycled the same sound effects from Resident Evil 2. The sound effects for the user interface and even the noises that the zombies make are taken straight from the second game. I find that completely inexcusable, and frankly, it's outright embarrassing when you consider that this came out on a newer system. Everything should have been redone, including the sound effects. If Resident Evil 3 could do it, Code Veronica had no excuse. In Resident Evil 3, the UI sounds were different, the zombie noises were different, and even the weapons sounded different. I even noticed that in Code Veronica, they recycled the same screams and grunts that Claire made in the second game. But why? They literally had the same voice actress. Were they afraid she was going to charge them extra for a couple of screams? I also have to say, from a visual standpoint, I find this game incredibly unimpressive. First of all, what happened to the sky? Did the developers forget to actually make one? This looks so outrageously bad. Did they think that the players would overlook that because it was on a new system? I mean, every time I look at that sky, I'm blown away because it makes the game look like it wasn't even finished. Like, was the game accidentally released while it was still being developed? It almost seems like some kind of beta test, which on some weird level would actually make sense when you consider the recycled sound effects and some of the other half-assed things in this game. I mean, look at Resident Evil 2, especially during parts like this. Look at how detailed that sky looks, and that was on PS1. And yes, I get it, those games used pre-rendered backgrounds, and Code Veronica was the first Resident Evil to not use pre-rendered backgrounds. But seriously, how hard is it to make a sky? And don't tell me it was due to technical limitations. Take a look at a game like Shenmue, same system and released 1 year prior to Code Veronica. And the sky is detailed, and they were even able to add shit like snow. Now granted, Shenmue was a game that required 3 discs, and the only way I could get all 3 of them to work was to play with my Dreamcast upside down, and I honestly wish that was a joke, but unfortunately it's not. But regardless, they made it work, so you can't tell me that Code Veronica couldn't. There's a part that made me laugh out loud where you find this room that's like some kind of rich billionaire's playroom with a carousel. And when you turn the power on, you see that the walls are covered in this cheesy wallpaper that make it look like a baby's room. But all I kept thinking while I was looking at it was how it looked better than the game's actual sky. Another problem I have with this game is that it fails miserably as a horror game. The suspense, the foreboding atmosphere, and the constant feeling of dread that you felt in the other games was completely stripped away here. The look and overall style of this game makes me feel like it was made by Disney. Like I almost expect Beauty and the Beast to show up and start dancing in this lobby. In the parts where I'm walking towards the castle, I feel like Maleficent's gonna pop up out of nowhere and turn into a dragon, and then I'll have to fight her with the sword. Like, to me, this is not how a Resident Evil game is supposed to feel. Even with something as simple as the camera angles, I think apply to this subject. In this game, the camera angles aren't stationary. This is the first one where the camera moves and follows you, which on one hand is innovative, and it definitely makes things a bit more convenient, but on the other hand, once again, it strips away the creepiness. It wasn't until I played this game for the first time where I actually realized how effective the fixed camera angles were in the previous games. All the crooked angles and ominous backgrounds, they made you feel like you were watching a movie. There was more creativity involved with it, and Code Veronica, that overall effect is just completely gone. And that leaves me with one final complaint, and if you've watched my other videos, this shouldn't come as a surprise to you. While there are aspects of Code Veronica I like, I still think it's a noticeable step down from Resident Evil 3. As far as I'm concerned, the only advantage that Code Veronica had was that it was made on a newer system. Therefore, it had the advantage of being a longer game, plus it had more advanced graphics. And by graphics, I really just mean the textures, because as I said before, I don't find this game to be visually impressive. But the issue for me is that I sincerely believe that this game dropped the ball in the sense that they really should have brought back some of the elements from Resident Evil 3. The fact that they were able to bring back the quick turn means that they were able to form some kind of connection with Resident Evil 3, but for a reason that remains a total mystery to me, they stopped at the quick turn and decided not to bring back anything else. The dodging mechanics, for one, I think really could have improved this game. The part where I was fighting the plane tyrant, for example, or the part where I had to run away from Steve, all I kept thinking was how much better those parts would have been if I had the opportunity to dodge their attacks, especially with their insane accuracy. And it's not a matter of, oh, let's look for ways to make the game easier. It's a matter of, hey, let's give the players a fair chance to work with these incredibly poorly designed parts. And for the record, I know some people aren't crazy about the dodging mechanics in Resident Evil 3, but again, it's at least nice to have them as an option. And if you don't like the dodging mechanics, no one's forcing you to use them. You still have the option to just play regularly, but people like me would like to have the option. And not to mention, the developers could have also utilized this opportunity to fine-tune the dodging mechanics to make them better for a newer game. But instead, you're stuck using the old-ass control scheme with bosses that have 100% accuracy, and the only thing you could do is keep chugging down mixed herbs. That to me shows how poorly made this game was in some areas. Resident Evil 3 might not be as long or as challenging as Code Veronica, but I still think it's an overall superior game. Alright, so that basically covers the review portion. In summary, I am a fan of this game to a certain extent, but it's not without flaws. And really, that's an understatement because the game is not just flawed, it's amazingly flawed. And quite frankly, I think it begs for a remake. And like I said before, I am stoked. I was very impressed when I saw what Capcom did with the Resident Evil 2 remake, and I hope they go in a similar direction with this one. Hopefully they could surprise us with some other things as well. Now let's talk about predictions and things we want to see happen. Feel free to let me know what you guys think. I for one think they're going to make it faithful to the original game. Judging from the trailer, you could see a lot of Easter eggs. I do think that this game is going to be much darker in tone. I do believe that because Capcom knew that this was such a highly requested game, they plan on delivering the goods, at least hopefully. I can't wait to see what they do with Alexia because like I said, I think her screen time was cut too short. And I really think she has potential to become one of the best villains. The only thing I think they should get rid of is Alfred having the split personality thing, just because I really don't think it did anything to help the overall plot in the original. I feel like whoever wrote this story was just trying to tell everyone that they watched the movie Psycho, and they thought it would make the story more compelling if they slapped on that kind of plot twist. But that's the exact problem I have with it. It feels like they slapped it on at the last minute to be extra compelling. It really wasn't needed. And for the record, I like the concept of Alfred being a deranged killer that lost his mind after being separated from Alexia too long, but the Psycho twist was just a tad overkill, just in my opinion. And as far as some of the more controversial elements go, such as the incest theme with the Ashford family, as weird as it may sound, I think they should keep it, just because it gives the story more of a batshit crazy nature. But I think they should take it a step further. I think that this game should have an anti-incest message, and in order to do that, they should reveal that Steve is in fact the byproduct of inbreeding. See, the game should end with a PSA that says, if you decide to sleep with your sister, you may end up with a child like Steve. It should say you must avoid clapping the booty cheeks of a blood relative, as you would never want an offspring this terrible. And if you do decide to clap those cheeks, you should do it safely, and I'll demonstrate now.